checking those measurements, of course. Heights were variable, but weapons less so. If the policeman had been carrying a rifle, the sniper could have compared the length of his forearms to the weapon, and thus determined the man's height to a reasonable degree of certainty. But at this distance, well beyond what was considered to be the effective range of the Dragunov, it was almost impossible to make that kind of determination. He only knew that the man was a police officer because of the light blue uniform shirt and the dark cap, and of course the fact that he was standing on the other side of the barricade. In any case, beyond about 800 meters, the rangefinder was merely a tool for estimation. He was using it now just to stave off boredom. He had been here for several hours now, motionless on the hillside, just 5 meters from one of the trails that meandered across the slope. Dozens of hikers and tourists had passed his location during that time, but none had noticed him beneath the camouflage screen covering him, the scoped rifle, and the sandbags that kept the weapon almost completely immobilized. Patience and discipline were the only things keeping him motionless. But they were enough. He closed his eye and the world vanished, but the details remained in his mind's eye like an afterimage. The forested slope around him, the city sprawled out below, the street, the crowd. 983 meters. That was the actual distance, as measured by the GPS, which was reliable to within a meter, to the spot at the tip of the uppermost chevron, the spot where, if he pulled the trigger, the 7.62 by 54 millimeter bullet would go, provided his elevation adjustment was correct and the wind did not change. Of course, when the time came to pull the trigger, it would almost certainly not go to that precise spot. The target would be somewhere else, a few meters from that reference point, maybe a few meters farther away or closer, and those minor differences would translate into increasing degrees of uncertainty. He would have to make rapid adjustments to the orientation of the rifle and to the scope. Without opening his eye, he slowly moved his right hand to the cheap transistor radio in his breast pocket and thumbed the wheel to turn it on. The radio was tuned to a local news talk station, broadcasting in Greek, a language that he spoke, though not fluently. He had left the radio off until now, partly because it would have been an unnecessary distraction, but mostly because, despite the low-profile earbuds that piped the broadcast directly into his ear canal, there was always a chance that a keen-eared passerby might hear and then investigate. Now, however, he needed to know what was going on in the world beyond that narrow slice he had been observing through the scope. He listened for almost a full minute, struggling to piece together the mosaic of familiar words in an unfamiliar context, until something clicked in his head, and a clear picture began to emerge. He opened his eye, returning to that singular point in space, 900-odd meters away, but kept listening until the weather report was given. Clear skies. The temperature was 30 degrees Celsius, humidity 40%, with no chance of rain and an occasional 5-mile-per-hour wind from the north. The sniper peered through the scope again, noting the slight movement of tree branches in the park to the right, and made the determination to leave the scope as it was. If the trees were still moving when the moment of truth arrived, he would make the correction by aiming ever so slightly to the right to compensate, a technique he had once been told called Kentucky windage. An American military officer had used that term, and in the same breath called him a natural. The sniper spoke fluent English, even then, but the term had confused him, prompting the American to expand on the definition. "It means you've got a gift," the officer had explained, "a natural talent for distance shooting." He would never forget those words, or the man who had uttered them. It was true, though. He had received only basic instruction in the fundamentals of shooting, but had intuitively grasped the interplay of spatial and ballistic factors that determined whether a round would strike its target. With time and experience, he had refined his abilities to the point where he could, with near perfect reliability, make a bullet go exactly